My name is David Richardson. I am 37 years old, and I work as a senior software architect for a tech consulting firm in Seattle, Washington. Most evenings, I sit in what used to be my home office, looking out at the view of Puget Sound that I had dreamed about for years before I could finally afford it. The house on Magnolia Hill had been my reward to myself after countless 60-hour weeks. After years of living in a studio apartment and eating ramen noodles so I could save every possible dollar. The Victorian-style home with its wraparound porch and original hardwood floors had been built in 1923, and when I first walked through it 3 years ago, I knew immediately that this was where I was meant to be. Not just because of the way the morning light filtered through the stained glass window in the front hallway, or because of the kitchen with its vintage fixtures and enough space to actually cook real meals. It was because, for the first time in my adult life, I would own something that was completely mine. Something that no one could take away from me or give to someone else they thought deserved it more. I had worked for this house in ways that most people could never understand. While my colleagues went out for drinks after work, I stayed late debugging code and optimizing systems. While they took vacations to exotic locations, I spent weekends doing freelance projects and building my reputation in the tech community. Every sacrifice had been worth it when I finally held those keys in my hand and walked through the front door as the owner, not just a visitor. But now, as I sit in my downtown Seattle apartment that I never planned to see again, surrounded by the few belongings I managed to salvage from the house that was supposed to be my sanctuary, I realize that some things can indeed be taken away, even when you think you have done everything right. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in Austin, Texas, attending a technology conference where I was scheduled to deliver a keynote presentation on cloud architecture. The conference was important for my career, the kind of opportunity that could lead to speaking engagements at other events and potentially open doors to executive positions at larger firms. I had been preparing for months, and the presentation had gone better than I had hoped. I was walking back to my hotel room, feeling proud of how the day had unfolded, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's name, Patricia Richardson, which was unusual because she rarely called during the day. She knew I traveled frequently for work and generally respected my schedule. "Hi, Mom. What's going on?" "Oh, David. I'm so glad I caught you. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all. I just finished my presentation. Is everything okay?" There was a pause, the kind that immediately made me suspicious because my mother was not typically someone who struggled to find words. Patricia Richardson had spent 35 years as a high school English teacher before retiring, and she could discuss any topic with confidence and clarity. "Well, there's been a development with your house situation." My house situation. The phrase struck me as odd because, as far as I knew, there was no situation with my house. I had a mortgage that I paid religiously every month, insurance that was up to date, and a property management company that handled maintenance issues when I traveled. "What do you mean, situation?" "Your father and I have been talking, and we realized that you might be overextending yourself financially with that big house. You're traveling so much for work, and it seems like such a waste to have all that space sitting empty most of the time." I stopped walking, standing in the middle of the hotel hallway as other conference attendees moved around me. "Mom, I can afford the house just fine, and I'm not traveling that much anymore. I turned down 3 projects this quarter specifically so I could spend more time at home." "I know, sweetie, but your father ran some numbers, and he thinks you could be investing that money more wisely. Real estate isn't always the best investment, you know." My father, Robert Richardson, was an accountant who had spent 40 years helping small businesses manage their finances. He was competent at his job, but he had never understood why I wanted to own a house instead of continuing to rent. He thought homeownership was an unnecessary burden, especially for someone in their 30s who might want to relocate for career opportunities. "Mom, I appreciate the concern, but I've got everything under control. The house is my home, not just an investment. Of course. But here's the thing, David. Your brother Tommy has been having such a difficult time lately with his job situation. And Jennifer thinks a vacation might really help him clear his head and figure out his next steps. Tommy, my younger brother by 4 years, who had never held a steady job for more than 18 months and who seemed to cycle through career changes like other people cycle through seasons. Jennifer was his wife of 2 years, a woman who had never worked full-time and who seemed to believe that Tommy's frequent unemployment was simply bad luck rather than a pattern of poor decision-making and lack of commitment. Okay, that's nice. I hope he finds a vacation that fits his budget. Well, that's just it. They've found this amazing opportunity to spend 6 weeks in Europe. Jennifer found this travel package that includes London, Paris, Rome, and Barcelona. It sounds absolutely wonderful. And the timing is perfect because Tommy is between jobs right now anyway. I started walking again, heading toward the elevator, beginning to understand where this conversation was heading and not liking the direction at all. Mom, what does Tommy's vacation have to do with my house? Your father and I were talking, and we realized that you have all this equity built up in that house, just sitting there not doing anyone any good. And poor Tommy has been so stressed about his career situation. We thought maybe you could help out by taking out a home equity loan to help fund their trip. Absolutely not. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was not interested in using my house as collateral to pay for my brother's European vacation. Mom, I worked 3 years to save the down payment for that house. I'm not taking out loans against it to pay for Tommy's vacation. It wouldn't be a loan exactly, more like a family investment in Tommy's mental health. An investment that I would be paying back with interest for the next 10 years while Tommy posts pictures from the Eiffel Tower on Instagram. There was another pause, longer this time, and when my mother spoke again, her voice had a different quality, less pleading and more matter-of-fact. Actually, David, we've already solved the problem. Your father found a buyer for the house, and we accepted their offer yesterday. The closing is scheduled for next Friday. I stopped walking again, this time because my legs suddenly felt like they could not support my weight. What did you just say? We sold the house. It was really the best solution for everyone involved. Tommy and Jennifer get their vacation. You get to simplify your financial situation, and your father and I don't have to worry about you being house poor anymore. You sold my house. I was not asking a question. I was trying to understand how those words could possibly make sense together. It was the practical thing to do, David. You can find another place when you get back, something more suitable for a single person. Maybe a nice condo downtown where you can walk to restaurants and theaters. I felt like I was having a conversation in a language I did not speak, where familiar words had been rearranged into combinations that defied logic. Mom, you cannot sell my house. It's my house. My name is on the deed. You don't have the legal authority to sell my property. Actually, we do. Your father looked into it, and it turns out that because we helped you with the down payment 3 years ago, we're listed as co-owners on the deed. We can make decisions about the property if we think it's in your best financial interest. The down payment. 3 years ago, when I was $10,000 short of the amount I needed to buy the house, my parents had offered to help. I had been reluctant to accept their assistance because I knew how family financial arrangements could complicate relationships. But they had insisted, saying they wanted to help me achieve my dream of homeownership, and they had assured me it was a gift, not a loan. What they had not told me, apparently, was that their gift came with strings attached. Strings that gave them legal control over the property I had thought was mine. You had no right to do this without consulting me, I said, and I could hear my voice getting louder, drawing looks from other hotel guests. We tried to discuss it with you, but you're always so busy with work and travel. We figured it was better to handle the situation efficiently rather than drag it out with endless conversations that wouldn't change the outcome. The outcome was already decided. I wasn't selling my house. David, you're being emotional about this. It's just a house. You can buy another one when you're ready to settle down properly. Just a house. The home where I had planned to build my life, where I had imagined hosting dinner parties and holiday gatherings, where I had finally felt like I belonged somewhere, was just a house to my parents. A financial asset to be liquidated when they decided it served their purposes better than mine. I have to go, I said, ending the call before my mother could say anything else that might make me completely lose my composure in a hotel hallway. I spent the rest of that day in my hotel room, missing the afternoon conference sessions and the networking dinner that I had been looking forward to. Instead, I made phone calls to real estate attorneys, trying to understand my legal options and discovering that my parents had indeed been more careful about protecting their interests than I had realized. The deed did list them as co-owners, and Washington state law gave them the right to sell the property if they believed it was in the best interest of all parties involved. I could potentially challenge the sale in court, but it would be expensive, time-consuming, and uncertain. Even if I won, the current buyers might withdraw their offer, and I would be left trying to sell the house myself while dealing with the legal and emotional fallout from suing my own parents. By the time I flew back to Seattle 2 days later, the house sale was already in motion. Tommy and Jennifer had booked their European vacation, complete with first-class flights and reservations at luxury hotels in 4 different countries. My parents had found a buyer who was willing to pay slightly above market value because they needed to close quickly, and everyone seemed satisfied with the arrangement except for me. I drove directly from the airport to Magnolia Hill, using my key to enter the house that would legally belong to someone else in less than a week. I walked through the rooms I had spent 3 years making my own, looking at the places where my furniture had been, where my books had lined the built-in shelves, where I had imagined my future taking shape. The house was already partially emptied. My parents had hired a moving company to pack most of my belongings and put them in storage, claiming they wanted to make the house more appealing to potential buyers. They had also made the decision about which items were worth keeping and which should be donated to charity, apparently based on their assessment of what would fit in a smaller living space. I found my father in the kitchen, supervising the removal of the vintage refrigerator that I had spent weeks restoring to its original 1950s glory. "Dad." He turned around, and his face showed no surprise at seeing me there, which told me that my mother had informed him about our phone conversation. "David, how was the conference? You sold my house. We solved a problem that was creating stress for the whole family. Tommy needed help, and you had resources that weren't being utilized efficiently." Robert Richardson was not a cruel man, but he was someone who saw life primarily through the lens of financial optimization. To him, the house represented capital that could be deployed more effectively elsewhere. The fact that it also represented my dreams, my security, and my sense of belonging was not part of his calculation. "This house was my home," I said, watching the moving men carry out the kitchen table where I had eaten breakfast every morning for 3 years. "It was an expensive piece of real estate that you were using as storage for furniture. You travel more than half the year for work. It made no financial sense. I wasn't traveling that much anymore. I turned down projects specifically so I could spend more time here." He shrugged, as if my personal preferences were irrelevant data points that did not factor into the decision-making process. "Tommy and Jennifer leave for Europe tomorrow. 6 weeks in 4 countries. It's exactly what Tommy needs to reset his perspective and figure out what he wants to do with his career." What he wants to do with his career? I felt anger rising in my chest. The kind of anger that had been building for 37 years of watching my brother receive support and assistance while I was expected to handle everything on my own. "Dad, Tommy is 33 years old. He's been figuring out his career for 15 years. At some point, maybe the problem isn't that he needs more vacations. Maybe the problem is that he's never had to face any real consequences for his choices. That's unfair, David. Tommy has had some bad luck with employers. Tommy has been fired from 6 different jobs for showing up late, leaving early, and generally treating work like an optional activity. That's not bad luck. That's a pattern. My father's expression hardened, the way it always did when anyone criticized Tommy or suggested that perhaps the family's approach to helping him was not actually helping at all. Your brother is going through a difficult time. Family members support each other during difficult times. I went through difficult times too, Dad. When I was 25 and working 3 part-time jobs to pay for graduate school, I asked if I could move back home for 6 months to save money on rent. You told me that I needed to learn to handle my responsibilities independently. When I was 28 and got laid off during the recession, I asked if you could help with my student loan payments for a couple of months. You said it would be better for my character if I figured it out myself. That was different. You were capable of handling those situations on your own. We were teaching you resilience. But Tommy isn't capable of handling unemployment on his own. So he gets a 6-week European vacation funded by the sale of my house. The house you couldn't have bought without our help in the first place. There it was. The reminder that everything I had achieved was somehow dependent on their generosity, that my success was not really mine but theirs by extension. It was the same message I had received my entire childhood, delivered in different words but with consistent meaning. You are not really capable of independence, you owe your accomplishments to us, and we can reclaim our investment whenever we decide it serves our interests better. I worked 60 hours a week for 3 years to save that down payment money, I said. You contributed $10,000 to a house that cost me $240,000. I paid every mortgage payment, every insurance premium, every maintenance cost. But somehow you think that $10,000 contribution gives you the right to make decisions about my property. It gives us the right to protect you from making poor financial decisions. Protecting me? You sold my home to pay for Tommy's vacation. How exactly is that protecting me? My father looked at me with the expression he had always worn when he thought I was being unnecessarily difficult about something that should have been obvious. David, you're 37 years old and you've never been married. You spend most of your time traveling for work or locked in that office upstairs writing code. What do you need with a 4-bedroom house? It's not like you're building a family there. The words hit me like a physical blow because they revealed something I had never fully understood about how my parents saw my life. To them, my house was not a home but a symptom of my failure to achieve the milestones they considered important. Because I was not married, because I did not have children, because I had chosen a career that required travel and flexibility, my need for a place to belong was somehow less valid than other people's needs. Maybe I would have been building a family there if I hadn't had to work constantly to afford it, I said. Maybe I would have had time to date and develop relationships if I hadn't been spending every weekend doing freelance work to pay for a house that, apparently, was never really mine anyway. You're being dramatic. It was just a house, David. You can buy another one. With what money? You just sold my house and gave the proceeds to Tommy for his vacation. We gave Tommy $50,000 for his vacation. The rest of the money is being invested in a portfolio that will provide better returns than real estate. You'll thank us in a few years when you see how much it's grown. $50,000. Tommy's European vacation was costing $50,000, which was more than many people earned in an entire year. He was going to spend more money in 6 weeks than I had spent on anything except my house in my entire adult life. I don't want a portfolio, Dad. I wanted my house. I wanted to come home from business trips to a place that was mine, where I could cook dinner in my own kitchen and sleep in my own bed, and know that no one could decide it wasn't right for me. You're being sentimental about real estate. It's not healthy. That word, sentimental, was one my father used to dismiss any emotional attachment that did not align with his practical worldview. My desire to own a home was sentimental. My frustration about having that home sold without my consent was sentimental. My sense that family relationships should involve some consideration for each person's feelings and preferences was sentimental. I'm being human, Dad. Most people form emotional attachments to their homes. It's not a character defect. It is when it interferes with sound financial planning. I looked around the kitchen one more time, trying to memorize the way the afternoon light came through the window above the sink, the way the vintage tile felt under my feet, the way the space had felt like the first place I had ever truly belonged. Where am I supposed to live when I get back from business trips? We've looked at some rental options for you. There's a nice apartment complex downtown with month-to-month leases. Very convenient for someone with an unpredictable travel schedule. They had planned everything. Not only had they decided to sell my house, but they had also decided where I should live instead. They had made choices about my furniture, my belongings, my future, and my living arrangements, all without consulting me about any of it. You've been planning this for a while, haven't you? Your mother and I have been concerned about your living situation for months. When Tommy's opportunity came up, it seemed like the perfect time to make some changes that would benefit everyone involved. Everyone except me. You'll see the benefits in time. You'll have more flexibility, better investment returns, and less responsibility. It's exactly what someone in your situation should want. My situation: single, childless, career-focused, apparently unable to make good decisions about my own life without parental intervention. I left the house that day knowing I would never return to it as my home. The new owners were a young couple with 2 small children who were excited about the big backyard and the good school district. They seemed like nice people, and I tried to feel happy that the house would be loved by people who would appreciate it properly. But as I drove away from Magnolia Hill for the last time, I realized that what had been taken from me was not just a piece of real estate. It was the first place I had ever felt like I could build a life that was entirely my own, without having to justify my choices or prove my worthiness to anyone else. 2 days later, I stood in the doorway of a furnished studio apartment in downtown Seattle, looking at the space that my parents had selected for me to live in. It was clean and modern and completely impersonal, the kind of place designed for people who were temporarily between more permanent living situations. There was a Murphy bed that folded down from the wall, a kitchenette with 2 burners and a half-size refrigerator, and a single window that looked out at the building across the street. It was the kind of apartment I might have rented when I was 25 and just starting my career, not the home of a 37-year-old senior architect who had worked for years to afford something better. My belongings from the house were in storage, except for the items my parents had deemed appropriate for apartment living. I had been allowed to keep my clothes, my laptop, my books, and 1 chair that fit in the small living area. Everything else, including the vintage furniture I had spent weekends refinishing and the kitchen equipment I had carefully chosen for someone who actually enjoyed cooking, was deemed unsuitable for my new lifestyle. That evening, I sat in my single chair and tried to figure out how my life had been so completely reorganized without my input or consent. 3 days earlier, I had been a homeowner with a mortgage, a garden I was planning to expand, and a sense of belonging somewhere. Now I was a renter in a temporary space, surrounded by someone else's furniture, with no garden and no sense of what came next. I called my brother Tommy to see if he had any awareness of what had been done to fund his European vacation. "David, I heard about the house. Mom and Dad said you decided to downsize and simplify your life. That's so cool, man. I've been thinking about doing something similar. Maybe getting rid of most of my stuff and just focusing on experiences instead of things." Tommy had never owned anything substantial enough to downsize from, so his philosophical approach to material possessions was easy for him to maintain. He had been renting the same 1-bedroom apartment for 4 years, and most of his furniture had come from garage sales or been borrowed from our parents. I didn't decide to downsize, Tommy. Mom and Dad sold my house to pay for your vacation. Wait, what? That doesn't sound right. Mom said you were feeling overwhelmed by homeownership and wanted to try apartment living for a while. Mom lied to you. They sold my house without consulting me and used the money to pay for your trip to Europe. There was a pause, and I could hear Jennifer in the background asking who was on the phone. Dude, that can't be right. They wouldn't do something like that without talking to you first. They would, and they did. You're leaving for London tomorrow with $50,000 that came from the sale of my house. 50,000? Jennifer said the trip was costing like 20,000. So he did not even know how much money was being spent on his vacation. He had simply accepted that somehow, magically, he and his wife would be able to afford 6 weeks in Europe despite the fact that he had been unemployed for 3 months and had no savings. Tommy, where did you think the money was coming from? I don't know. I figured Mom and Dad had been saving up for something like this. They've been talking about wanting to help us get back on our feet after my job situation didn't work out. Your job situation. Even Tommy's unemployment was described as something that had happened to him rather than something that had resulted from his choices and actions. Do you want to know why your job situation didn't work out? David, don't. I know you think I should have handled things differently, but that place was toxic. My manager was impossible to work with, and the company culture was completely dysfunctional. It was the same explanation Tommy had given for his previous 5 jobs. Bad management, toxic culture, impossible expectations, personality conflicts. Never anything he had contributed to, never anything he could have prevented, never anything he was responsible for. Tommy, you were fired for not showing up to work for a week without calling in. I was dealing with some personal stuff. They could have been more understanding. You were dealing with personal stuff because you spent that week in Las Vegas with Jennifer, gambling with money you didn't have while your employer thought you were homesick. How do you know about Las Vegas? Because you posted pictures on social media, Tommy. Pictures of you playing blackjack and drinking cocktails by the pool while your job was calling Mom and Dad asking if you were in the hospital. There was another pause, longer this time, and when Tommy spoke again, his voice had changed from confused to defensive. Look, I don't need a lecture from you about responsibility. You've never had to deal with the kind of pressure I've been under. It's easy to judge when you've got your perfect career and your perfect life all figured out. My perfect life that just got destroyed to pay for your vacation? That's not my fault. If Mom and Dad made decisions about your house, that's between you and them. I didn't ask them to sell anything. But you're still going to Europe tomorrow. We can't cancel now. The tickets are non-refundable, and we've already made arrangements for 6 weeks. It would be wasteful not to go. Wasteful. It would be wasteful to cancel a $50,000 vacation that had been funded by selling my house without my permission, but it was not wasteful to spend that money in the first place. Tommy, do you understand that I worked for 3 years to save money to buy that house? Do you understand that it was the first place I ever felt at home? And now it's gone, so you can eat expensive dinners in Paris? I understand that you're upset, but taking it out on me isn't going to solve anything. This is between you and Mom and Dad. It became between you and me when you accepted $50,000 that came from my house. I didn't know where the money came from, and even if I had, it's not like I forced them to sell your house. They made that decision on their own. And that was Tommy in a nutshell. Things happened around him, money appeared when he needed it, problems got solved by other people, and he accepted all of it as his natural right without questioning where it came from or what it cost anyone else. After I hung up, I sat in my studio apartment and tried to understand how I had ended up here. For 37 years, I had played the role of the responsible son. The one who worked hard and made good decisions and never asked for help unless it was absolutely necessary. I had assumed that responsibility and reliability were values that would be recognized and respected by my family. But I was beginning to understand that in my family, responsibility was not a virtue to be rewarded. It was a utility to be exploited. Because I could be counted on to handle my own problems, I received less support and attention. Because I did not create crises or demand assistance, my needs were considered less urgent than Tommy's. The house had been the first thing I had ever owned that represented my independence from this dynamic. It was proof that I could build something meaningful without relying on anyone else's approval or assistance. But even that had not really belonged to me, apparently. Even that had been subject to my parents' judgment about what I needed and deserved. I thought about my childhood and all the times I had watched Tommy receive help and support that was never offered to me. When he struggled in school, he got tutoring and accommodations. When I struggled, I was told to work harder and figure it out myself. When he wanted expensive toys or clothes, our parents found ways to afford them. When I wanted things, I was taught the value of earning money and saving up. I had told myself that this differential treatment was making me stronger, more independent, more capable of handling adult challenges. But now I realized it had also been teaching me that my needs were less important, my feelings were less valid, and my dreams were more expendable than Tommy's wants. The next morning, I woke up in the Murphy bed and tried to figure out how to make coffee in a kitchenette that had no counter space and no coffee maker. I ended up walking to a Starbucks 3 blocks away, something I had not had to do in 3 years because I had owned a house with a real kitchen and a coffee maker I had chosen myself. As I waited in line behind other apartment dwellers who were also outsourcing their morning routines to commercial establishments, I realized this was going to be my life now. Instead of making breakfast in my own kitchen, I would buy it. Instead of having space to store groceries and cook real meals, I would order takeout. Instead of having a home office where I could work comfortably, I would work from the Murphy bed or from coffee shops. Everything that had made my life feel stable and rooted had been replaced with temporary, commercial alternatives that cost more money and provided less satisfaction. I was now paying more per month in rent for my studio apartment than I had been paying for my mortgage, but getting a fraction of the space and none of the sense of ownership. When I returned to the apartment with my overpriced coffee, there was a message on my voicemail from my mother. "Hi, sweetie. I just wanted to check in and see how you're settling into your new place. Tommy and Jennifer got off safely this morning. They're so excited about their adventure. I think this trip is going to be exactly what Tommy needs to get his life back on track. Your father wanted me to remind you that your investment portfolio is already showing positive returns. We'll send you the quarterly statements so you can see how well your money is working for you. Talk soon." Your money. The money from my house was now described as my money, as if I had participated in the decision to sell the house and invest the proceeds. As if this had been my choice rather than something that had been done to me. I deleted the message and tried to focus on work, but it was difficult to concentrate in the small apartment. The noise from the street was constant, and the lack of space made it impossible to spread out the kind of materials I needed for complex projects. I found myself missing not just the house itself, but the way it had supported my ability to do my job well. After 3 days of trying to work from the apartment, I started spending my days at a co-working space downtown, paying for the privilege of having a desk and reliable internet that I had once owned outright. It was another monthly expense that had not existed when I lived in the house, another way that my cost of living had increased while my quality of life had decreased. A week after Tommy and Jennifer left for Europe, I got a text message from Tommy with a photo of the two of them standing in front of the London Eye, both of them grinning and holding champagne glasses. "Thanks for making this possible," the message read. "We're having the time of our lives. Thanks for making this possible." As if I had voluntarily contributed to their vacation fund rather than having my house sold without my consent to pay for it. I showed the message to my colleague Jake, who had been listening to me complain about my housing situation all week. "Dude, that's seriously messed up," Jake said, looking at the photo of my brother and his wife toasting their European adventure with wine that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. "Can't you sue them or something?" I talked to a lawyer. Technically, my parents had the legal right to sell because they were listed as co-owners on the deed. I could challenge it, but it would be expensive and uncertain, and the money's already been spent. "So you're just stuck with this?" "Unless I want to spend the next 2 years in court fighting my own family, yes." Jake shook his head. "I can't believe your brother went along with it. If my parents sold my brother's house to pay for my vacation, I would refuse to go." Tommy doesn't see it that way. In his mind, the money just appeared because he needed it, the same way money has always appeared for him when he needed it. He doesn't think about where it comes from or what it costs other people. That's not normal, David. Most people would feel guilty about benefiting from something like that. Tommy doesn't do guilt. He does justification. Everything that happens to him is either someone else's fault or someone else's responsibility to fix. I spent that evening looking at my brother's social media posts, watching him document his European adventure with photos and videos that showed exactly how my house money was being spent. First-class flights, 5-star hotels, expensive restaurants, shopping excursions, guided tours, luxury experiences that most people could only dream of affording. In one video, Tommy was standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, talking about how grateful he was for the opportunity to travel and expand his horizons. "Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need exactly when you need it," he said to the camera. "I feel so blessed to be able to have this experience with my beautiful wife. Life gives you exactly what you need. Not my brother's house was sold to pay for this trip. Not my parents made a decision that hurt someone else so I could benefit. Just the vague, passive language of someone who had never had to think about how his good fortune might be connected to someone else's loss." 2 weeks into Tommy's vacation, I was working late at the co-working space when I got a call from an unknown number. "Is this David Richardson?" "Yes. My name is Eleanor Chun. I'm calling about the house you used to own on Magnolia Hill." My stomach dropped. The new owners were having problems with the house, and somehow it was going to become my problem to solve. "What about it?" "I'm your neighbor across the street. I was your neighbor when you lived there. I wanted to talk to you about something I discovered in my backyard." Eleanor explained that she had been doing some landscaping work and had found a metal box buried near the property line between her yard and what used to be mine. The box contained documents and photographs that appeared to belong to the previous owner of my house, someone who had lived there in the 1950s. "I thought you might want to look at these before I turn them over to the new owners. Some of the documents mention renovations and improvements that might be relevant to the house's history." I met Eleanor the next evening at a coffee shop near her neighborhood. She was a retired librarian in her 70s who had lived across from my house for 23 years. She had watched 3 different families live there before me, and she had been sad to see me go. "You were the best neighbor we'd had," she said, opening the metal box on the table between us. "You actually cared about the house and the neighborhood. You always kept your yard beautiful, and you were quiet and considerate." Inside the box were deed records, renovation receipts, and photographs that told the story of the house through different decades. But what made my hands shake were the letters at the bottom of the box, written by the man who had owned the house from 1952 to 1978. The letters were addressed to his son, who had moved away for college and never returned to Seattle. They described the man's hopes that someday his son would want to come back and raise his own family in the house where he had grown up. "I've spent 25 years making this place perfect for you," one letter read. "Every improvement, every repair, every decision has been made with the hope that someday you'll want to call this home again. The house is waiting for you whenever you're ready." But the son had never come back. He had built his life in another city, and when his father died, he had sold the house to strangers rather than return to claim his inheritance. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked Eleanor, feeling the weight of the parallel between the letter writer's story and my own. "Because I think you understand what that house meant to him in a way that other people might not. I watched you work on that yard, and I could see that you were building something that was meant to last. I could see that you were trying to create a home, not just a place to live." She was right. Every weekend project, every careful restoration, every small improvement had been part of my vision for a future that included that house. I had not just been maintaining a property. I had been building a foundation for the life I wanted to live. "The new owners seem nice," Eleanor continued, "but they're already talking about major renovations. They want to knock down walls and modernize everything. They don't understand that the house has character because of its age, not in spite of it." I thought about the vintage fixtures I had spent months finding, the original hardwood floors I had carefully refinished, the period-appropriate paint colors I had researched and chosen. All of it would probably be stripped away and replaced with whatever was currently fashionable, regardless of whether it suited the house's character. "I wanted you to have these letters," Eleanor said, "because I think that man would have understood what happened to you. He would have understood what it means to lose a home you love." That night, I sat in my studio apartment and read through the letters from the 1950s homeowner, and I realized that what had been taken from me was not just a piece of real estate but a connection to something larger than myself. The house had represented continuity, stability, and the possibility of creating something permanent in a world that often felt temporary and uncertain. The man who had written those letters had understood that a home is not just shelter but a repository for dreams, a place where the past and future intersect, a foundation for the kind of life that extends beyond individual wants and needs. My parents had never understood this because they had never struggled to find a place where they belonged. They had married young, bought a house in their 20s, raised their children in the same neighborhood where they still lived. Home, for them, was a given rather than an achievement. But for me, the house on Magnolia Hill had been proof that I could create stability and belonging through my own efforts. It had been evidence that I was capable of building something worthwhile, something that could last beyond my immediate needs and wants. Now that proof was gone, sold to fund my brother's temporary pleasure, and I was left trying to figure out how to rebuild not just my living situation but my sense of what was possible for my life. 3 weeks into Tommy's vacation, I got a call from my father. "David, we need to talk about your attitude." "My attitude?" "Your mother is upset about the way you've been handling this house situation. She feels like you're being ungrateful and stubborn about changes that are clearly in your best interest." "Dad, you sold my house without my permission to pay for Tommy's vacation. In what universe is that in my best interest? You're being dramatic about this. It's not like we left you homeless. We made arrangements for you to have a place to live, and we invested the proceeds in a way that will benefit you in the long run. I don't want the investment returns. I want my house back. The house is gone, David. You need to accept that and move forward with your life. Accept that my own parents sold my home to pay for my brother's vacation. We made a decision that benefited the whole family. Tommy needed help, and you had resources that weren't being used efficiently. My house was being used as my home. That's the most efficient use possible for a house. You work 70 hours a week and travel constantly. You barely spent any time there. I was working 70 hours a week to pay for the house, and I had already cut back on travel specifically so I could spend more time at home. Your mother and I think you've been using work as an excuse to avoid dealing with other aspects of your life. Maybe this change will give you the opportunity to focus on what's really important. What's really important? According to my parents, what was really important for me was not owning a home or having a space where I felt comfortable and settled. What was really important was being available to fund my brother's lifestyle without complaint. Dad, what's really important to me is having a place that feels like home. The house was that place, and now it's gone. You can make any place feel like home if you put in the effort. The problem is that you've been treating your house like a fortress where you could hide from real life. I wasn't hiding from real life. I was living real life. I was working and cooking and reading and gardening and trying to build something meaningful. By yourself. You never brought friends over, you never dated anyone seriously enough to introduce them to the family. You were using that big house to justify being antisocial. There it was again, the suggestion that because I was not married and did not have children, my need for space and stability was somehow invalid. Because I had chosen to focus on my career and my personal interests rather than conforming to their timeline for traditional milestones. My living situation was seen as a problem to be solved rather than a choice to be respected. I was dating someone, I said. Her name was Sarah, and I was planning to introduce her to the family at Christmas. But now I'm living in a studio apartment that's too small to have anyone over for dinner, so I guess those plans are off. It was true. Sarah and I had been seeing each other for 8 months, and the relationship had been growing more serious. She was a graphic designer who worked from home, and she had been spending more and more time at my house, using the guest room as a temporary office when she needed a change of scenery. We had been talking about the possibility of her moving in with me, and I had been imagining what it would be like to share the space I had created with someone who appreciated it the way I did. But now there was no space to share, and the relationship was already showing signs of strain under the pressure of my dramatically changed circumstances. If this Sarah person is the right woman for you, she'll understand that you're going through a temporary adjustment period, my father said. She'll understand that my parents sold my house to pay for my unemployed brother's European vacation. Most people don't have a frame of reference for understanding something like that, Dad. Most people understand that families sometimes have to make difficult decisions that benefit some members more than others in the short term. This isn't a short-term situation. The house is gone permanently, and Tommy's vacation money is spent permanently. There's nothing temporary about this. The investment returns will compound over time. In 10 years, you'll have more money than the house would have been worth. In 10 years, I'll be 47 years old and still living in temporary housing because you decided that a house I worked 3 years to afford was too much for me to handle. David, you're catastrophizing. You're acting like this is the end of the world instead of an opportunity to simplify your life and focus on what really matters. What really matters. The phrase that my family used to dismiss any priority that did not align with their vision of what my life should look like. What really matters to me, Dad, is having a home. What really matters to me is feeling like I belong somewhere. What really matters to me is being able to make decisions about my own life without having to worry about whether my family approves. And what really matters to us is seeing you happy and settled in a relationship instead of hiding in an expensive house that you use as an excuse not to engage with other people. I wasn't hiding. I was living. There's a difference. If you say so, but your mother and I think this change will ultimately be good for you, whether you can see that now or not. After I hung up, I sat in the studio apartment and tried to understand how my parents could genuinely believe that destroying my living situation was in my best interest. How could they think that selling my house without my consent was an act of love rather than an act of control? I realized that, in their minds, I was not a 37-year-old adult who was capable of making good decisions about my own life. I was still the child they had raised, someone whose choices needed to be managed and whose priorities needed to be corrected when they deviated from the family's expectations. They could not see that the house had been important to me not as an escape from relationships but as a foundation for them. They could not understand that my career success was not a substitute for personal fulfillment but a prerequisite for it. They could not comprehend that their help was actually harmful because they had never had to build their own sense of security from scratch. For weeks into Tommy's vacation, Sarah and I had the conversation I had been dreading. "I can't do this anymore," she said as we sat in a coffee shop, "because my apartment was too small for serious conversations. I understand that you're going through a difficult situation, but I feel like I'm dating your family problems rather than dating you." "What do you mean?" "Every conversation we have is about what your parents did and how angry you are about it. Every plan we make gets canceled because you're dealing with storage units or lawyers or apartment hunting. Every time I see you, you're in a different emotional state because of something your brother posted on Instagram." She was right. The house situation had consumed my mental and emotional energy to the point where I had little left to invest in our relationship. I was not the same person she had been dating for 8 months, and I did not know when or if that person would return. "I know this is hard," I said, "but it's temporary. Once I get my living situation figured out, things will go back to normal." "Will they? Because it seems like this is not really about the house, David. This is about patterns in your family that have been going on for decades, and those patterns are not going to change just because you find a new place to live." She was right about that too. The house had been the catalyst, but the underlying dynamic that allowed my parents to make major decisions about my life without my input had been developing for 37 years. Even if I found another house, even if I managed to rebuild my sense of security, there would always be the knowledge that my family saw my independence as conditional rather than absolute. "I need some space to figure out what I want," Sarah said. "And I think you need space to figure out who you are separate from your family's expectations and demands." After she left, I sat in the coffee shop for 2 more hours, trying to understand how my parents' decision to sell my house had managed to destroy not just my living situation, but also my relationship with the person I had been planning to build a life with. Everything that had made my life feel stable and promising had been swept away in service of Tommy's temporary pleasure, and I was left trying to piece together some version of normalcy from whatever remained. That evening, I got another text from Tommy, this time a video of him and Jennifer at a wine tasting in Tuscany. They were laughing and toasting the camera, clearly having the time of their lives. "Week 4 in paradise," the message read. "We never want this to end." I stared at the video, watching my brother enjoy an experience that cost more than most people's annual salary, funded entirely by the destruction of my home and my relationship. He looked relaxed and happy in a way I had not felt since the day I got my mother's phone call in Austin. For the first time since this whole situation began, I felt something beyond anger and frustration. I felt a cold, clear understanding of exactly who my family was and what they were capable of. I understood that they would always prioritize Tommy's wants over my needs, his temporary pleasure over my long-term stability, his comfort over my security. And I understood that as long as I remained connected to them, as long as I continued to play my assigned role as the responsible son who could be counted on to sacrifice for the family's benefit, this pattern would continue indefinitely. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls that would change the direction of my life completely. The first call was to my company's human resources department, asking about opportunities for permanent relocation to our London office. I had been offered positions there twice in the past, but I had turned them down because I did not want to leave Seattle and the life I was building there. But now there was no life in Seattle to protect. My house was gone, my relationship was over, and my family had made it clear that they saw my presence as a resource to be managed rather than a relationship to be valued. The second call was to a real estate agent in London, someone who specialized in helping American expats find housing. I explained my situation and my timeline, and she assured me that she could help me find something suitable within my budget and time frame. The third call was to my mother. "Mom, I wanted to let you know that I'm taking a position with my company's London office. I'll be moving to England permanently in about 6 weeks. There was a long pause, and when she spoke, her voice had a quality I had never heard before. Something between surprise and panic. David, that seems very sudden. Don't you think you should take some time to think this through? I've been thinking about it since you sold my house. This is what makes sense for my career and my life. But your family is here. Your whole life is here. My life was here, Mom. You sold it to pay for Tommy's vacation. That's not fair. We were trying to help you make better financial decisions. And I'm making the best financial decision possible under the circumstances. The London position comes with a significant salary increase and housing assistance. It's exactly what I need right now. David, you can't run away to another country just because you're upset about the house. I'm not running away. I'm moving toward a life where my decisions about where I live and how I spend my money won't be subject to other people's approval. We're your family. We love you and we want what's best for you. What you want is for me to be available to provide resources for Tommy whenever he needs them, while accepting that my own needs and preferences are secondary to his. That's not true. Mom, you sold my house to pay for Tommy's vacation. You made decisions about my furniture, my belongings, my living arrangements, and my financial investments without consulting me about any of it. You treated me like a child whose life could be reorganized whenever it served the family's purposes. We were trying to help you. You were trying to control me. And the only way I can be sure it won't happen again is to move somewhere that makes it impossible. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with my mother alternately trying to convince me that moving to London was a mistake and promising that things would be different if I stayed. But I had already made my decision, and nothing she could say was going to change my mind. When Tommy returned from Europe 2 weeks later, tanned and relaxed and full of stories about his amazing adventure, he called to ask if I wanted to get together and see his photos. I can't, I said. I'm busy with moving preparations. Moving? Mom said something about London, but I thought she was joking. You're really moving to another country? I am. Dude, that's crazy. Why would you want to live somewhere that's so far away from your family? Because my family sold my house to pay for your vacation, Tommy. Because I need to live somewhere that my decisions about my own life can't be overruled whenever it's convenient for other people. Come on, man. You're really going to hold that against me forever? I didn't even know about the house thing until you told me. But you didn't give the money back when you found out where it came from. We couldn't give it back. We'd already spent it, and the trip was non-refundable. You could have come home early. You could have stayed in budget hotels instead of luxury resorts. You could have acknowledged that the money came from destroying something that was important to me. David, I'm sorry about your house. Okay? But that's between you and Mom and Dad. It's not fair to blame me for decisions they made. It became my business with you when you accepted $50,000 that came from selling my home. I didn't know where the money came from, but you didn't ask. You needed money for a vacation, and money appeared, and you took it without questioning how a couple of recently retired people on fixed incomes could suddenly afford to fund a $50,000 European trip. I thought they'd been saving up. For 6 weeks in first-class hotels? Tommy, you're 33 years old. You've had 6 different jobs in the past 5 years, and you've never been able to save money for anything. What made you think you suddenly deserved a vacation that costs more than most people's annual income? I've been under a lot of stress with the job situation. Jennifer and I thought a change of scenery might help me figure out what I want to do next. And did it? Did spending $50,000 of my house money help you figure out your career goals? There was a pause, and I could tell that Tommy had not given much thought to what would happen after the vacation ended. He had approached the trip as an escape from his problems rather than a solution to them. I'm still processing everything, he said finally. It was a really transformative experience. Transformative enough to motivate you to find steady employment? I'm not going to rush into just any job. I want to find something that's a good fit for my skills and interests. What skills would those be, Tommy? You don't have to be a jerk about it. I'm not being a jerk. I'm asking a legitimate question. You've been finding yourself professionally for 15 years. At what point do you plan to actually settle on something and stick with it? Not everyone can be like you, David. Not everyone wants to work 70 hours a week at a job they hate just to afford an expensive house they never have time to enjoy. I loved my job, and I loved my house. The problem was not that I worked too much. The problem was that you needed a vacation that cost $50,000. Look, I'm sorry about what happened, but I can't undo it and I can't fix it. Moving to London isn't going to change anything. Moving to London is going to change everything. It's going to mean that the next time you need money for something you can't afford, you'll have to find it somewhere other than my life. 3 weeks before my departure date, I had lunch with Eleanor, my former neighbor, who had become something of a confidant during my preparation for leaving Seattle. I'm going to miss having you across the street, she said. Even when you didn't live there anymore, it felt like you were still part of the neighborhood somehow. I'm going to miss it too, but I can't stay here knowing that everything I build can be taken away whenever my family decides it serves their purposes better. Have you thought about what you'll do if they try to contact you after you're settled in London? I've thought about it. I'm going to keep my distance until I'm confident that they understand I'm not available to fund Tommy's lifestyle anymore. That could take a long time. It could take forever. I'm okay with that. Eleanor nodded, understanding in a way that my own family had never been able to understand that some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive without consequences. I saved something for you, she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. It's a photo of your house from last spring, when your garden was at its most beautiful. I thought you might want to remember it the way it was when you lived there. The photo showed the house on a sunny morning in May, with the flower beds I had planted in full bloom and the lawn perfectly maintained. It looked like the home I had imagined when I first walked through it 3 years earlier, the place where I had planned to build a life that would last decades rather than months. Thank you, I said, though the words felt inadequate for the gift she was giving me. I hope you find what you're looking for in London, Eleanor said, and I hope someday your family understands what they lost when they decided your brother's vacation was more important than your home. On my last day in Seattle, I drove past the house on Magnolia Hill one final time. The new owners had already made changes, adding a swing set in the backyard and planting different flowers in the beds I had carefully designed. It looked like a happy family home, which is what it had always been meant to be. But it was no longer mine, and it never would be again. At the airport, I got a text message from my mother. Call us when you get settled. We love you and we want to work things out. I deleted the message without responding, because there was nothing to work out. They had made their choice when they sold my house to fund Tommy's vacation. I was making mine by building a life where such choices could not be imposed on me without my consent. As the plane took off, I looked down at the city where I had spent the last 12 years trying to build something permanent, something that could not be taken away. I had failed at that goal, but I had learned something valuable in the process. I had learned that home is not just a place you own, but a place where your ownership means something, where your decisions are respected, where your investment in the future is honored rather than liquidated for someone else's immediate gratification. I had learned that family is not just the people who share your DNA, but the people who honor your boundaries, who support your dreams, who understand that love is not the right to make decisions about someone else's life. And I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people who have hurt you is to remove yourself from situations where they can continue to hurt you, giving both of you the space to figure out whether a healthier relationship is possible. 6 months later, I was settled in a flat in London with a view of the Thames, working at a job I loved, and slowly beginning to trust that the life I was building there belonged entirely to me. I had not spoken to my parents or my brother since leaving Seattle, and I had no plans to break that silence until I was confident that they understood the consequences of their choices. Some stories end with reconciliation and forgiveness, but this story ends with the understanding that sometimes love means walking away, and sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is the clarity that comes from refusing to enable their dysfunction. My house was gone, but my life was my own again, and that, I realized, was worth more than any piece of real estate could ever be. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Before you go, I have left 2 more stories here on your screen. Both from men who discovered that family is not always who you are born to, it is who stands by you when the truth comes out. Click on whichever one calls to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be the outsider looking in, that notification bell is your invitation. Until tomorrow, remember, your story matters even if they tried to erase it.